Hello, and welcome to today's Up to Thrive Manage Your Mind Mindful Moment.
Welcome to Opt to Thrive, your go-to podcast for women's wellness in midlife, designed to educate, support, and inspire you to live your very best life. And now your host, Dr. Karina Sims.
Hello, thanks for joining me today. This is kind of something I haven't really done before, a really kind of impromptu podcast today. I'm doing some work for the Fit Physician where I do some nutrition coaching for women physicians in North America. It's part of one of these wonderful, great things I get to do that COVID made available to us, being able to work in different countries just from the luxury of my sunroom and doing stuff that I absolutely love, which is amazing. Guys, it is really blowing a gale out there today. So if you hear some wind in the background, I do apologize. That's one of the drawbacks of recording in the sunroom. But I really wanted to get this recorded today while it was heavy on my heart and my mind. It was actually kind of brought on probably started by a consult I had in the menopause clinic. I had a patient who came to see me, and it was interesting. I can't say that I don't remember actually ever having anyone present quite in this way. She sat down and look, there's so many things I like to talk about in the menopause clinic. I've got so much on the agenda. I want to talk about, the symptoms. I want to do some educating around menopause if that's what we need to do. I want to listen to what's happening for them, and I want to look at chronic disease risk factors and talk about, the power that they've got over the things that are happening to their body and what they can do from here on out to help lower those risks. There's lots of things I want to talk about. So I always tell them there's lots of things that I want to talk about, but I want to know what has brought them to the clinic. I want to prioritize what it is they're hoping to get out of the visit that day. And so this particular patient told me that she had stopped having her periods about 3 years ago, and that was pretty much it, right? Just maybe she gets a little bit warm now and then. That's about it. And her friends are, starting to have all these conversations, and they're, drenched with sweat and talking about all these horrible things that are happening to them through this transition period. And she thought maybe there was something wrong with her. Well, why? I just want to understand, because I just don't quite understand what they're talking about. I thought, wow, that's, it's interesting. It's an interesting perspective. So that was great. We got to talk about, the fact that 20% of us are going to be as lucky, as fortunate as her, right? She's just going to sail on through this thing and not be bothered by it, which is amazing in terms of symptoms. But just because she doesn't have symptoms doesn't mean that she's not still at increased risk of all those things that we become at increased risk for after this stage of life. So cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease like diabetes and obesity, and sleep disorders often show up about this time of life, not necessarily related to menopause, but they can show up at this time of life. So a great time to get in and have a health check. But in terms of menopause, osteoporosis is another one. We have a pretty rapid loss of bone around that time of that last menstrual period. Lots of changes are happening. And so very much a great opportunity for her to learn about those things and all the things that she needs to be aware of. And so that was that. We had a great consult and a lot was done. She had some other things that needed to be sorted out. So anyway, we sorted that out. Then I come to today. I'm getting ready to do a webinar with the Fit Physician, and it's a menopause-based webinar. And so talking about all of this stuff with their audience. And one of the slides that's in the presentation is touching on, the real struggle as a woman physician in particular and going through menopause. And I suppose the intention of the slide is just to let people know that they're not alone when they're going through this. And I really, today when I was, reflecting on that slide in particular and the points that I wanted to get across, I remembered back to my experience, to when I first started going through all of this. And I think, I've touched on it, I've mentioned it kind of lightly in different ways, but I hadn't actually reflected on it in the same way that I reflected on it today. And I thought it would be a really good podcast to talk about. And for my audience, the intention is, again, to just remind women that they're not alone when they're going through this. And having another perspective, I think, can really help you feel like you're not alone in this, that this isn't just happening to you, and to hear about other people's experiences, because I still have patients coming to me that aren't having these conversations with family members or friends, and do very much feel alone in what they're going through. And a lot of women who don't feel comfortable having these conversations with those people, or with anyone. And in fact, sometimes they're embarrassed to have the conversation with me. In fact, I had one patient recently who, on her third visit, finally opened up to me about menopause symptoms. And she told me that it took her 3 visits to actually bring it up because she was so embarrassed about it. And then I have patients like one recently who saw the gynecologist for something, who told her that she should come off of her hormones because she should be able to cope with the symptoms of menopause. So this is still happening. And one of the things I am so passionate about is making sure that women don't get that message, that, we're changing that narrative, that we're making this more something that we're talking about more and normalizing it, because it is normal. It's a normal part of the process. I said 20% are going to have not really any symptoms at all. That means that 80% of us are going to have symptoms. 20% of those are going to be pretty severe. So when I reflected back on my experience, I kind of put myself back into that woman who at the time was the only female GP in the practice. We would have females kind of cycle in and out through their training, and often, younger because they were still doing their training. So probably years off of going through this transition themselves. I didn't have a lot of interaction with other female colleagues, certainly not through my clinic. Through my work as an obstetrician, I did have a couple of female colleagues, but both had, young families and probably some years off yet going through what I was going through at the time. And when I remembered back to how awful, it was really awful, I did feel so alone. And there was a sense of shame. One, that whole, I'm getting old. This means I'm getting old. Menopause means I'm getting old. And what does that mean, right? There was that. There was a sense of shame, not quite appreciating or not quite accepting that aging process. But then there was the side of, I should just be able to get through this. I shouldn't need any help. It's ridiculous. We were trained, give women hormones if they are severely affected. Well, okay, maybe you could call this severe, but man, I've done a lot of hard things in my time. I like to think I'm a tough girl, right? Told you about being a undercover security guard at a record store back in the day when we had records and tapes before CDs. I think CDs were actually probably coming out about that time, but I was an undercover security guard that would arrest people, detain them in really bad neighborhoods, right? And I come from where I come from, and I've got a medical degree coming from a family that no one even graduated from high school before me, right? I can do hard things. So there was a sense of shame around, man, I shouldn't need any help here. I should be able to just get through this. And then there was all of this fear and anxiety. I remember the girls from my obstetrics team wanting to have dinner together, a dinner meeting, just the 3 of us to have a chat. And I honestly, the thought went through my mind that this was going to be an intervention. that they were concerned about my level of practice, that they were going to pull me aside and tell me this, because I was having these experiences, and it makes me like really emotional thinking about it now. I have such compassion for Karina that was going through that at the time, completely alone. Doing a cesarean section and asking for an instrument I could not remember the name of. I've been doing obstetrics for nearly 20 years, but I could not remember the name of the instrument. And so asking for the thing that with the thing, and doing these hand gestures and pointing to the tray of where the instrument would come from. Trying to remember names of medications, going completely blank. So many things, things that I've always known just fell out of my head. They come back, but the sleep deprivation and the brain fog and the getting so irritable with my patients when they wouldn't just answer that question, right? I asked you, that's not what I asked you, right? When I think back at that Karina that was going through all of that, I feel pretty bad for her, right? And I don't know, I've joked about this along the way. I have talked about it, but I don't think I actually have really sat in the grief, that was caused from that period of my life. Essentially, I ended up giving up obstetrics. I was so terrified of doing something that was going to harm someone, that was going to put someone in harm's way. There is no time for brain fog when a baby's not breathing. You just need to do your job, right? When a woman is bleeding, you need to fix the bleeding. There is no time. And there came a time when I didn't feel like I could trust my brain anymore. Essentially, it all kind of boiled down to the fact that I had anxiety for many years around delivering babies. And, 98% of the time it's all rainbows and daisies. And then 2% of the time it's the absolute opposite of rainbows and daisies, whatever that looks like. It is absolutely opposite, right? You have got to be on your game, and you've got to be able to make those calls, and you got to be able to make them quickly. And I had spent my whole career managing anxiety around that. And so when I got to this stage of my life, I just didn't want to do it anymore. And now looking back, there were probably, things that I could have done. Maybe there are some treatments and things that I probably could have looked into. However, it also pushed me into the direction of menopause care for other women, so that other women don't have to go through this, so they don't have to feel alone in this, so that they can be properly managed, so they don't feel like they have to just white knuckle it and get through it, because those days are gone. We do not need to do that anymore. There is treatment. And you know what? Sometimes the treatment is just knowing that this is completely freaking normal, right? For some of us, it's normal. It's normal to be sleep deprived and have this ridiculous amount of brain fog. You think you're getting dementia. It can be completely normal. And maybe sometimes just having someone listen and reassure you that that is normal, maybe that's all the treatment you need. In my case, I needed hormones. And once I got the hormones, that did fix a lot of stuff. However, I then decided to retire from doing obstetrics and refocus my energy on these other things, which I have no regrets. I had an amazing career. I was very fortunate that I had very few really horrible catastrophes. You have some really sad things that happen along the way, things that cannot be helped. But when I look back over my career, I feel like I was a competent practitioner and I did a very good job. I'm very happy with that. And I am absolutely thrilled to be doing the job that I'm doing now. And this is part of that. I don't even want to call it a job because it doesn't feel like a job. Like, I get to do what I love every day, and I get to have these interactions with women, and I get to listen, and I get to educate and support and inspire and motivate as much as I can, right? I get to do those things. That's what I get to do now, and I'm just so thrilled. I hope that this hits the mark. If it's you out there that's struggling through this, feeling really alone in what's happening, either alone because you feel like you're, not getting any of these things, or is there something wrong with you? I think that's probably, well, it is obviously less likely because only 20% of women are going to be there. Probably more likely that you're in the 80%, and there could be some of you who aren't having these conversations, don't have people to have these conversations with. In terms of my friendship group, I was the first one in my friendship group to start having these symptoms. I felt very grateful that I then could help my very best friends through this. So my message today, aside from you're not alone, is really to encourage us to keep having these conversations. There are probably women around you who are really struggling and not talking about it, right? Sometimes it just takes a little bit of open communication. There are relationships really struggling because the couple is not understanding and appreciating what's happening to the woman in this time of life, right? To her body, to how she's showing up. And sometimes that can cause a lot of trouble within the relationship, a lot of misunderstanding. So it's, that's part of why I'm doing this, is to educate people so that they're aware of the things that can happen. So one of my messages with doing this today is to just ensure that we are communicating, that we're talking about it, that we are normalizing menopause, because it is just like puberty. It is a natural part of our lives if we're lucky enough to get this far down the road, right? So that's what I have for you today. I hope that has been helpful for some of you. Share it around. Let's get this message out. Let's make sure that we're all doing our part to normalize the conversation and taking the shame right out of it. Let's support and lift each other up. I hope you've enjoyed this Manage Your Mind mindful moment. Hey, before you go, if you connected with my story today, if you're in a place of feeling flat, frustrated, or like your body just isn't responding the way that it used to, I want to personally invite you to my free live webinar this Saturday. It's called, and it took me a while to come up with the title because there's so much I want to squeeze into this little webinar, but I ended up eventually landing on practical evidence-based strategies to gain more energy, strength, and confidence with less body fat in midlife. We're going to talk about the changes that are happening in your body right now and what you can actually do about them. We're going to talk about the 3 key shifts that every woman in midlife needs to be looking at making to have better function, health, strength, and energy, and how to structure your nutrition and your exercise so you stop spinning your wheels and you start seeing the results that you want, results that are going to last. If your diet's not that bad and you're active, but you're still not feeling great in your body, or maybe you're just not even sure where to go with your nutrition, how to structure it now, or your exercise, what does it look like? What should you be doing to get these kind of results? Then this is going to be very helpful for you. You can register through the link in the show notes. I hope to see you there. I can't wait. Have a great week, everyone. And until then, I hope you opt to thrive.
The Opt to Thrive podcast is designed for information purposes only and is not engaged in the giving of medical advice. The information provided on the podcast should not be used for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease. In no way should the information provided by Opt to Thrive be considered medical advice, and at all times the advice of a medical professional should supersede recommendations from Opt to Thrive. If you have or suspect you may have a health problem, you should consult your healthcare provider. The views expressed in this podcast are purely that of Dr. Sims and do not in any way reflect those of the institutions she contracts her medical services to.
Thank you for listening to Opt to Thrive. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate and share the podcast. You can visit our website at opttothrive.com and leave a comment for any subjects you would like to hear more about.